This is the Arturia MiniFreak, and amazingly, we've gone through so many effects, but we haven't gone through the perhaps the most usable or used effects, which, you know, like, for example, reverb, which is what we're going to cover now. To get to reverb, we're going to go down to the third effect and choose reverb, and now it's on. We have 3 different settings to sort of navigate, and I'm going to turn down the middle one and leave the last one where it's at. First, we're going to talk about reverb. So let's get to the third setting. Now we're on reverb. Let us first talk about this first knob, which is time, the decay of the reverb. And this is sort of your default setting. And that's kind of in the middle. So let's bring that down to nothing. Let's hear the decay without any decay. Yeah, there's still something happening there. So it's not actually 0, it's just the least of the effect. It's an interesting pitch thing happening. Okay, but we came in at about 50%. Let's go up to 100%. So that's pretty great. There's a extensive reverb length there. So here's about 3/4. Let's move on to intensity, which in the case of a reverb is damping. What damping is it is a filter that sort of cuts off the high frequencies. It rolls off the high frequencies in the reverb sound, because typically when you make a sound in nature, the high frequency content burns itself out way more quickly than the low frequency content. So reverb in general tends to dampen the sound, which is remove the high frequencies. So you have the ability to bring that in. We've been at kind of halfway. But here is if we completely took all damping out. You can hear all of those high frequencies of the sound in the reverb itself, whereas before we were not hearing it. I mean, you can hear the sound, but it doesn't have the high end that it has when there's no damping. Let's turn it all the way up. So when you have it set to that, it's pretty much like as if you turned your release all the way up, because all of the frequencies are present and it just keeps going, which is basically what would happen with your release, were you to set it to that. But we can also go way high with the damping. So let's turn it relatively high and now listen to what happens to high frequencies in the reverb signal. They're largely not there, and you get this really sort of dark and warm sound out of the reverb. And it will hold on to bad notes that you played. Anyway, we can turn this all the way up, and here's what happens. Nothing. We basically filtered out all of the reverb, I think. What we might want to do is, for right now, let's just have about just some damping. And our final knob here is the amount. And I would have expected it to be a thing where, like, kind of a balance between dry signal and wet signal. But it's kind of not that. I think it's just like dry signal and then adding more and more wet signal on the dry signal. That's what it ends up sounding like. So if we turn it all the way down, we have this, which is the least interesting reverb setting you could find in the reverb, which is basically all dry, no wet. But as we bring it up, we're going to hear more wet. And then we just hear more and more wet with the dry. And we can hear the real length that the decay will go to. So, for example, let's hear that with no damping. It's quite a thing. But, you know, with damping, it's more reverby. What we haven't done really yet is play a sound that isn't a really abrupt sound. I mean, obviously the best way to show what is reverb is to have the sound be short and punchy so you can hear the reverb doing its thing. Right now, I'm going to smooth off the attack and bring up the release and make this into a sound that will sound pretty with reverb, but also sound like it has reverb, because the synthesizer, by virtue of release, kind of creates its own sort of vague reverb effect. But anyhow, let's have it listen. And what this teaches me is that I have done far too little with this reverb, because that really is quite beautiful and useful. I mean, you can make some really beautiful outcomes with a reverb like that. It's something special that this synthesizer is so packed with function, and then it has these nice effects that you can put on top. I mean, really, you can cover all of the keyboard types that exist with this tiny little box. It's impressive to me. Okay, so that is the reverb we find on the Arturia MiniFreak.